Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and salam sejahtera. Our group 6 will present chapter 7 is basic chromatography.
This is our group members. Nur Azizah Fiza binti Muhammad Sofian, Siti Aisyah Safrina Natasha binti Muhammad Safri, Mimi Nur Safia, and Mardana Safia binti Muhammad Nizam. Our content. The first one we have introduction and theory, methodology, example of results, conclusion and references.
My name is Mimi Safia. My matrix number is 2021108871. So for the introduction, what is basic chromatography? So chromatography is a technique for physically dividing mixture into their component part. It is a typical scientific method for locating undefined mixture component. So chromatography is a type of chromatography in which paper sheet or strip are used as the absorbent or stationary phase through which a solution is made to flow by comparing the dissolved chemical compound various rate of movement over the paper sheet. It is a cheap technique of doing so. It is a stroke analytical tool that just require a tiny amount of data. In basic chromatography, we have many types of basic chromatography, but for our group, we are choose planar chromatography to explain more about it. So, planar chromatography, aspiration technique in which the stationary phase is supporting coated on a flat film or in the pose of paper. For planar chromatography, stationary phase is supporting on a flat plate or in a pole of a paper, and the mobile phase move through capillary action. So paper chromatography, so the technique is which is we use paper chromatography to separate a sample mixture into its individual components. So the paper is must be hung and dipped into a solvent at the bottom of the paper strip. So SP, which is the stationary phase, it is a water molecule absorbed on cellulose fibers on a paper liquid phase. And then for the stationary phase act as a trapped water, and for the mobile phase, the solvent or the liquid phase. So the type of aspiration is partition chromatography or liquid to liquid. So why do we use paper chromatography is because of we can identification and separation of color mixture like pigment, and then separation of mixture for polar and nonpolar compound. So the concept in paper chromatography is paper is made of cellulose, a polar substance. So as solvent rise up through the paper, it's made the sample mixture which is start to travel up the paper with the solvent to separate the component. So the non-polar compound is weakly held or retained toward the stationary phase or the water molecule on cellulose fiber. So travel further in with a mobile phase, the compound will elute first, and then more polar compound is strongly held or return toward a stationary phase, travel slower with mobile phase, the compound will elute later.
My name is Siti Aisyah Safrina Natasha binti Muhammad Safri and my student ID is 2020894338. Today I will talk about the theory of chromatography and theory of chromatography for child in pen. So chromatography is actually based on principle where molecule and mixture apply onto surface or into solid and fluid stationary phase separating from each other while moving with the aid of mobile phase. Factors effective on the separation process include molecular characteristic and affinity or difference among their molecular weight. So because of this difference, some components of mixtures stay longer in stationary phase and they move slowly in the chromatography system, while others pass rapidly into mobile phase and leave the system faster. Principle involved. There's actually two principles in paper chromatography, which is partition chromatography or absorption chromatography. So for partition chromatography, when substances are partitioned or distributed between liquid phase. The two phases are water held in pores of the filter paper and the other phase is mobile phase which pass through the paper. So when mobile phase move, separation of the mixture take place. So the compound in mixture separate themselves based on difference in their affinity to a stationary and mobile phase solvent under the capillary action of pores in the paper. For absorption chromatography, it occurs between solid and liquid phase, where the solid surface of paper is stationary phase and liquid phase is the mobile phase. Behind paper chromatography of gel in pen, first we need to observe our main objective, which is to use paper chromatography to identify whether certain color ink are poor substance or mixture. So for our experiment, we use the setup as shown, and for the stationary phase, we will use the chromatography paper. And the mobile phase, we will use the solution of NH3, butanol, and water as the mobile phase. Okay, so here in the diagram, four different kind of pen will be at the starting line below liquid level. And we will actually cover the container to make sure the atmosphere in the beaker is saturated with solvent vapor. So saturating the atmosphere in the beaker with vapor stop the solvent from evaporating as it rises up the paper. So the solvent will travel up the paper and different component of ink mixture will travel at different rate. So from there we can determine whether certain color inks are poor, substance or mixture. So this is the theory for the our experiment. It's actually simple, which is if you know the theory for the paper chromatography, then it is similar to the theory of our paper chromatography of our experiment. The difference will just be in our ink spot. Well, some will use other mixture, but for our experiment, we use gel ink pen.
My name is Narazin Shafiza binti Muhammad Sopian. My ID number is 2020830024. We conduct this experiment to identify whether certain color inks are poor substance or mixture, to obtain a paper chromatogram of various ink gel inks, and to identify components of inks by calculating RF. So the first step is wash hands thoroughly to remove excess oils from skin. A ruler and a piece of chromatography paper were obtained from instructor. The paper was handled only on the edge to avoid leaving fingerprints as this may hinder the elution process. Step 2. 17 ml of the developing solvent was put in a clean, dry 800 ml beaker and covered with plastic wrap held in place by a rubber band. The chromatography paper was placed in a sheet of clean notebook paper to avoid picking up dirt from the beanstalk. The paper was oriented into a landscape position. A straight line was drawn across the paper by using a pencil and a ruler to measure accurately.
about 2 cm above the bottom edge, that is starting line. Draw another line about 10 cm above the bottom edge, that is finish line. And the starting line from one side about 2.5 cm was measured in and lightly drawn a small X center on the starting line. Four more were drawn 1.5 cm apart. In the center of each X, a small spot of ink color was made in this order: blue, green, red, purple, orange, based on the figure 1. The ink gel pen color was allowed to dry by gently waving the paper in the air. After the spots have dried, the edge of the paper was stapled together end to end, leaving a gap so that the edge do not quit meet. Okay, so that's how the picture of the edge of the paper was stapled together. And the next step is the paper cylinder was put in the beaker containing dissolvent solvent. The paper does not touch the wall of the beaker, so make sure the spots of the ink gel pen must be above the surface of the solvent in the beaker. Immediately, the beaker was sealed with plastic wrap and the solvent allowed to rise up in the paper. The position of the solvent front and how the original spots begin to separate into bands of colors as they move up were observed every few minutes. When the solvent front has risen up about 2 cm from the top of the paper, remove the paper from the beaker and immediately mark the solvent front with a pencil before the solvent evaporates. After the paper has dried, the distance traveled in cm of the spots from the original line and also the distance traveled by the solvent front were measured for each of the ink gel pens. So this is example chromatogram of paper chromatography. So the last step is the RF values were calculated and recorded for every color spot. For each of the ink gel pen's colors, the number of components was found and their color was described. This is how to calculate the RF value. So RF value is equal to distance traveled by the component divided by distance traveled by the solvent. This is how to measure the distance traveled by the solvent front and to measure the distance traveled by the spots. This is the table result that we obtained for this experiment, which is paper chromatography. This is the table result after the experiment of paper chromatography. This is how to calculate retention factor, which is RF value. So, for example, RF value for yellow pen is equal to 0.5981. And then look at the example of the picture beside. So RF value for red pen is equal to 0.20556. So that's how we calculate the RF value for paper chromatography.
In conclusion, the objectives of the experiment was achieved. The ink gel pen is the mixture substance. Paper is made of cellulose, a polar substance. As solvent rises up through the paper, it meets the sample mixture, which starts to travel up the paper with the solvent to separate the component. Non-polar compound is weakly held or retained towards stationary phase, which is water molecules on cellulose fibers. It will travel further with mobile phase. The compound will elute first and the RF value is high or big. More polar compounds is strongly held or retained towards stationary phase. Travel slower with mobile phase. The compound will elute later. The RF value is low or small.